for internet sale. I'm not gonna change your mind.
And, you know, and they get up here, you buy a jet, and then we'll go to the house if that's what you want. If not,
That makes me happy. It makes me happy.
okay, so we're gonna do it. Now, right?
You got it? You got it.
Tony felt a challenger was just too much money for only two people. Her husband Chad has jet fever, so they picked the larger, more spacious Challenger.
Are we still good monetarily with that?
Terry, sometimes they unmute. Yeah.
You got
Let's see.
Bill Leonard, and now Myrna just showed up.
What's the? Yeah.
For those online, we will be starting shortly.
I recognize that voice. How you doing, Blair?
Much better. Thank you for asking.
Good to hear, man.
Who's here? Hey, Joe, how are you?
All right, it's 2:30, so I'll call to order the meeting of the CARES Act Allocation Committee. I'll ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Kenyon?
Here.
Hanson? Fries?
Here.
Sanchez?
Here.
Sturgis? Thomas?
Here.
O'Shea?
Here. We have a quorum. All right, first item of business is approval of the minutes for the April 17th, 24th, and 31st meetings. Mr. Fraz moves, Mr. Kenyon seconds. Please call the roll.
Kenyon?
Yes.
Fries?
Yes.
Sanchez?
Yes.
Sturgis? Thomas?
Yes.
O'Shea?
Yes.
Sturgis?
All right, the minutes are approved. Public comment. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address the committee this afternoon?
Come on, Doug.
Hearing none. Anyone in the online that would like to address the committee? All right, then we'll go on to our discussion items. Status of funds, Mr. Ricker.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. You have before you, our beginning balance was $92,900,217.90. We've accumulated $104,264.92 in interest. We've expended, per resolution 20-284, $8.3 million, $40,000 for an ending balance of $84,664,482.82.
Any questions on the status of funds from our treasurer? Hearing none. Thank you for being here, Mr. Rickert.
Thank you.
All right. Next discussion is application process and timeframe. And I know that Mr. Berger and Mr. Loveless are here available to discuss the applications. Why don't we, Mr. Loveless or Mr. Berger, if you could at least address the committee regarding the applications that have been coming in so far.
Thank you. The application process is proceeding very well. The municipalities are working with our office and with KEB, our consultants, on their applications. There are a lot of applications starting to come in, and we're in the process of reviewing those at this point. This is the basically tough work on our end that's going to be coming up with KEB and with Scott Berger's department. Given the volume of everything that's coming in, we are anticipating that the small business webinar will be Friday, and the applications will be opened up on the website at that point for them to participate in the program. At this point, we're anticipating a request to the committee, if possible at all, that your next meeting be October 8th or 9th. And the purpose of that meeting will be to address and review proposed resolutions to go on to the county board to approve the municipality's applications and any other applications and matters that we need to have the county board sign off on in the process. So at this point, things are proceeding well. The next action we will need from the committee, we anticipate being October 8th or 9th, so we can make that next Tuesday on the county board meeting.
For the those parties that have been submitting applications, has there been any glitches in that process?
There have been some concerns that KEB is working with the municipalities directly, to address issues they see, and they're working with them. We haven't been told of any kind of serious issues at this point. Everybody's working well together as far as we know. So
All right, let's talk about the business grant program, because the original game plan was, or at least discussion was to open up the process for applications as of today. But that, we also had the webinar for explaining how to complete the application set for this Friday, correct?
Correct.
And so what the staff is requesting is that we consider modifying the timeline for that to begin the commencement of applications as of Friday.
That's correct. We got a little bit behind on basically the document review. And we are requesting that that date be pushed to Friday after the webinar.
All right, I think, you know, when we had talked about this last week, I know a couple of the committee members had raised the issue of, you know, if this is kind of a first come, first served process, or there's going to be a lot of applications, and we're going to have the webinar after the fact, it wouldn't make sense to have
Correct.
applications open up until that time frame. So with respect to that process then, is we had a time frame or a window within which applications were going to be submitted. Is staff suggesting that we extend the back end of the application process?
The applicant, we're not actually requesting that right now, but it's subject obviously to the committee's thoughts on this. They will have a full 2 weeks after the application portal opens on Friday to submit their applications. We have conferred with KEB. It would be possible to push that another week, but that's certainly up to the committee. We believe that 2 weeks is sufficient, but that's subject to your thoughts and your review, your directions to us.
All right, I'd like to open this up to discussion at the committee level right now. Is there any concern about deferring the commencement of the application process date till Friday so that the webinar can take place and then the applications can come in? Mr. Hanson?
Good afternoon, thank you. I understand the need for changing the rollout date. Is it possible to have that a day before the webinar? And I ask that on behalf of probably the municipalities and the chambers that may want to preview it and have questions before they actually arrive at the webinar. I don't have a problem with the
You're saying a day before or a day after the
day
webinar?
before, so that they could take a peek even before they get to the webinar to know what the portal looks like and the application process looks like.
All right, well, that's 2 questions. The first, I think that what you're asking is, can we have the application itself available for review to the public before the date? And the other issue is, when can we accept applications? Fabiola, do you want to address the committee?
The application will be available on the 18th. None of the applications have been made available to any other applicants before the opening date. What I do have online is instructions for everybody to look at for eligibility and required documents. They can all start collecting and preparing in advance for the webinar. So that application will be made available on the 18th because it's part of the portal.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I'm satisfied with that. If that is not subject to change between now and the webinar, and if it's going to look identical or darn near close to it with the actual application, as long as the folks that may be doing some of the marketing for us, as long as they can preview the final details, I'm satisfied with that.
Again, the goal is to get the funds out to the businesses as soon as possible. I mean, the history of the committee is to try to move forward within reason. We delayed by a week at this request of the municipalities, the time frame. That gained us some benefit, at least in some clarification in the regulations. So I don't think a few day delay here is going to be a significant issue. But anyone else from the committee who want to weigh in on this issue?
And I apologize for being late. Could you just sum that up? So we're taking the small business grant application opening window and moving it behind the webinar.
We're moving it from what was originally planned to be today till Friday after the webinar, so that the webinar can take place and then we get a better, actually, that theoretically is more efficient for our staff in reviewing it and our consultant, because if the people attend the webinar and are educated, they'll be less likely to want to amend their application because of something they learned in the webinar.
And Fab, that webinar link
It's
is
on there.
available for us to point everybody to right there.
There right now if you want to look at it. Also, we're trying to work on a budget template that would help everybody. We've done it before for the other applicants for the municipalities and smaller units of government. So we're hoping that doing this the same for the small business will help with that financial requirement as well.
Thank you, sir.
All right, what about the ending date for the window for applications? Is the committee comfortable with a 2-week timeframe, or is there a desire to extend it?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so the recommendation of the committee will be to keep that date in place. Any other applications that are out there that are pending, fire districts, park districts, any other issues with those that are a challenge at this point?
No, their deadline is tomorrow, so we're still receiving those applications and getting those in.
Okay. All right, and if there are concerns, of course, you'll raise them with the committee so that we can address them. All right, while we're on the business grant program, I do want to bring up the other issue that came up last week. Well, a couple points. First of all, I received some calls from constituents and some board members regarding the issue of business grants and the purpose of the grants. And someone had asked a question about business interruption and whether that was really one of the targets of the grant. And I said that in terms of our application, we're not going to identify a specific line item as business interruption. But of course, the intention of this committee was, and specifically this issue came up when we talked about prioritization, is that those businesses that were shut down as a result of the COVID restrictions are the ones that we would expect to have the highest priority and have the most substantial expenses. So that's certainly something that we've taken into an account as a committee. I just wanted to address that as we move forward. But the issue that was brought up last week was this concept of home-based businesses and whether we wanted to expand the permissible applicants under the business program to include that group of business. And I'll open that up to discussion at the committee level at this point. I think the history on this was that, we were dealing with businesses, and by the way, the exclusion of home-based businesses is not unique to us. In other areas, that was one of the criteria that they had, in other governmental regions, a criteria that was in place. And I think the reason behind that is most of those based businesses don't have rent that they're paying to a third party. They typically have a much smaller base of employees. So those were I think that was the history of the exclusion from them from a practical standpoint. But certainly, I think it's been raised. The committee should discuss it, and then we should decide what we want to do. Mr. Frost.
Yeah, I agree. I've been an advocate for the business portion of this since the beginning. But when I think of a home business, they're probably not paying rent. Obviously, they don't have a brick and mortar facility, which is one of our goals, is to keep storefronts viable. And if they have more than one or so employees, they're probably in violation of their local zoning codes. I just don't. I think we would probably raise our staff's workload by about 1/3, and I just wonder if it would really do a whole lot for our economy. So that's my thoughts.
Anyone else, Mr. Kenyon?
Well, they might have legitimate expenses like insurance. We know insurance can be pretty expensive. Liability insurance, it's cheap according to Cliff.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to exclude anybody, so I don't have a problem, but I don't want to overwork our staff. At this late date, we don't need to slow the process down.
I was wondering if Mr. Berger had any thoughts on that.
Yes, I have one thought. When you look at the list of eligible expenses that we are willing to cover under this program, the first two items involve occupancy expenses, rent or mortgage costs, as well as utility costs. I don't think the county has the staff capacity to do inspections of home-based businesses to verify how much of their residents is dedicated for that use, that would be a burden for us to monitor and ensure compliance with.
Mr. Hanson.
Thank you. And along those lines, when it comes to staff requirements and making sure that we comply with the federal guidelines, think about the number of programs that are out there right now for a homeowner. And I'm not saying that everyone can take advantage of those, but they're out there, either at local levels, it could be municipality, state, or federal level, for either mortgage assistance or utility assistance. And should a home-based business apply for such a grant from our Kane County program, that would be
1,180.00.
that would be a lot of work for staff to verify if there's going to be a duplication of expense reimbursement from other programs.
All right. Anyone else from the committee have any comments on this issue? Is there anyone on the committee that wants to propose an amendment to our program that would include home-based businesses? Hearing none, then we can move on.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Yeah, Doug Shefflow.
Yeah.
You mind if I speak?
Sure.
So on the home-based business issue, what I would propose is that you make them eligible, but exclude the rent portion of the eligible expenses, the rent/mortgage expenses. And, you know, hearing the discussion now and previously, another caveat that you could insert would be that they have to have had gross revenue of pulling $25,000 out of the air based on a 2019 calendar year. So these would be real businesses. They'd have, you know, it's not the the smallest of business, not that 25,000 is large, but again, the examples that I gave, they're real businesses. They just do their administration at home, you know, out of their house. So they would have the exact same, they wouldn't have the rent expense, obviously, or we would exclude that, but they would have employee expenses and all the other eligible expenses that are listed on that sheet, which I don't have in front of me. That's my suggestion for that. It eliminates too many people applying, and it eliminates the rent issue. I have some other comments. I don't know if you take those later, or how do you want to?
Are they germane to the discussion that we're having right now about home-based businesses?
No, just on the business in general, the business grants in general.
All right, let's finish up
Go
on
ahead.
the home-based businesses.
Okay.
In light of Mr. Shefflow's comments, is there anyone on the committee that wants to change their stance on including home-based businesses? All right, hearing none at this time. Mr. Shefflow, you have other comments on the home-based business program?
The business grant program, yeah. So the Chamber of Commerce's are eligible under the grant program, under the business program, not the non-for-profit program, as I understand it. But I think the rules say they have to be 501c3, I think. But the Elgin Chamber of Commerce actually predates the establishment of 501c3 nonprofit status. So, and I know there's others, you know, there are other code sections. They are nonprofit, they're real, they're substantial. So we may have inadvertently excluded the Elgin Chamber of Commerce. I don't know if this has been brought to anybody's attention or not, but yeah, I just noticed. Go ahead. I mean, they're not charities, so I think as such, but I don't think they pay taxes.
All right, well, I think if that's a technicality, I think we can, as a committee, take applications from them. And if, Mr. Berger, can we, with respect to that criteria, would it be appropriate to consider a modification of the criteria in light of Mr. Shefflow's comment?
That's not something I'm familiar with. I can look into that and get back to you. The guidelines that you approved in your resolution at the county board did call for chambers to be 501c3 entities.
Okay.
So if the board wishes to change its eligibility criteria, I would need, I think I would need
A
an amendment.
resolution to that effect?
I think
Okay.
so, yeah.
All right, so if we said 501c3 or otherwise establish themselves as nonprofit, and 501c3 is a code section, an internal revenue code section that
Correct.
certifies that they're nonprofit, but I don't think anyone in this room or on the board thought that we were going to exclude the Elgin Chamber of Commerce, so.
And I think there might be others too that are different code sections. That's kind of the.
Right, okay, but maybe a not-for-profit entity within the terms of the Internal Revenue Code instead of citing 501c3 would be inappropriate. Would that be an appropriate amendment, Mr. Shefflow?
I think so.
Would you like us to research that before you consider taking action?
Yes, if you
Okay.
could. I think the
We'll do
goal
that.
would be, we can certainly suggest to all chambers that they apply. And if we need a final tweaking of that resolution as we get to the board meeting next month, we can do that in time to respond to their application.
Makes sense.
Right. All right, is that the consensus of the committee to pursue that? All right, Mr. Shefflow, any other comments about the business program?
Yeah, a couple more. So should we consider excluding King County employees and elected officials from the grant program, particularly if we did go to a home-based business, or I don't know, that it seems to me that should be defined, I guess. If everybody's welcome, then I guess all the elected officials should feel free to apply without stigma. But I think there would be stigma if people apply and it's not spelled out one way or other. I'm just going to get my other ones out there. And then, so the other one is the City of Elgin's challenging the population numbers. And so that's just a heads up, I guess.
Yeah,
Chairman Holshed, I'd like to respond to Mr. Shefflow before he moves on.
All right, let's.
That's fine.
First of all, on the population issue, we can discuss that later in the committee meeting. Anything else on the business program, Mr. Shefflow?
Okay, yeah, that's the, my 2 cents I would extend to give them 3 weeks. I think it's hard for small businesses to apply for a grant that they've never, they don't know anything about and never done before type thing. So, but that's it.
Mr. Surgis had a comment in response to one of the suggestions that Mr. Shefflow made.
Yeah, Doug, I just want to be clear. I am involved in multiple businesses, 3 of which are state licensed, all 3 of which would qualify for very small amounts of these grants. And when I say small, I'm talking under $1,800. I'm wondering why a state, a business that would need to be state licensed would be disqualified simply because I'm a board member, if it meets all the rest of the criteria.
Well, I'm not saying it has to be disqualified. I think it ought to be stated affirmatively that it's not disqualified. So, if you're the only one applies, you get your grants, or you're found to be a 20% owner of some business. I think that ought to be hit head on rather than, with the PPE, they doled out all the money, and then the newspapers had headlines that certain church took money or something. Well, it's fact-based, but it's sort of they shamed some companies into giving it back, I would say. So I just think it ought to be decided if all the CAT committee members are applying, so be it. But let's that be. I think it's fine. I guess in your mind, there's no exclusion, So I guess everybody's eligible.
I don't think, let me just say this. Mr. Shefflo and I discussed this issue briefly, privately, I think after our last meeting. And the program as it currently exists does not contain any exclusions for any entity because of a relationship or being part of the county board or employee of the county. And I think that was the intention of the committee. Now, whether, there's a lot of philosophical discussion you can have about this concept. On one hand, you could argue we try to get people involved in government, and it's a sacrifice to the extent that they have businesses in the area. And if being part of the board would exclude them from applying for a benefit, that's just another deterrent to getting people that would otherwise be qualified to run. On the other hand, there is the public perception about when elected officials or employees of a governmental body accept other benefits that are administered by the county. We could have a law school exam question on the issue of conflict of interest on this one. I think that's a personal decision that individuals have to make. And, we are a public body, so the process will be open to the public, and there could be ramifications from that. But I think that as the chairman of the committee and one board member, I think the understanding was to help local businesses. And I wouldn't want to say that if someone was affiliated with a local business, whether being an employee or otherwise, that should have a negative impact on the funds that we would make available to that business if they truly had a hardship. So that's why the program, at least I didn't recommend we put any conflict provision. Mr. Loveless, you want to address the committee on that?
I'd like to point out, the devil's always in the details on these things. The one item that would have to be looked at carefully in any application by elected officials or employees of the county is the fact the county has passed an ethics ordinance. There are provisions in that ethics ordinance related to obtaining a benefit as a result of somebody's position, much less voting on something to accept it. So this raises issues that would have to be looked at in the context of anybody's individual application. And we would have to take a look at the Ethics Act.
And I would say that on that issue, for sure, if you were involved with someone who applied, you certainly shouldn't be contacting staff who's reviewing the applications. And maybe when it comes time to vote on the funding of the business applications, you could abstain at that time if you're involved in an entity that's involved in the process. But I don't know. Anytime you discuss this, of course, it could create headlines that create a negative impression. I think the important thing is we're here to help businesses. I'm not aware of any conflicts that would apply. I'll just say this from my personal perspective. We've got a law firm, the courts were closed. We did have economic impact. I'm not going to apply because because my own personal feeling is that even though we would qualify, I'm not going to do it. But that doesn't make me any better from another board member who may be in a similar situation that wants to apply. So I don't think it's really up to the specific individual at the time.
Mr. Chairman, I totally agree with you, and I will not be applying. However, just the way it was phrased came across as it would be really tough to wash off smarmy. And I don't want that word used for anybody that are my brethren on this board. So
I get it. All right. All right. Any other questions on the business program? So what we're doing, we're directing staff to open up the application process at the conclusion of the webinar this Friday, and then we'll have the 2-week program go forward. Hopefully getting a number of applications, hopefully exactly $8 million worth of applications, all that qualify so that we can get the money out right away. All right. Timing on distributions, I think Mr. Lelvis referenced that. If we were to have a special meeting, or not a special meeting, but a meeting of this committee so that we could frame resolutions to move on to the October board meeting for dispersing those funds that have been approved. Does October 8th seem reasonable for this committee, Thursday?
Yeah,
Thomas.
I'll check on conflicting dates and times, and we'll get back to you to schedule the specific time for a meeting. But, and if it, I'll try to keep it on Thursday if we can. If not, it'll be Friday of that week. But I'll get back to you on that. All right. One of the other items we need to discuss, because this is an issue that involves the board in another capacity, is the county share of the unincorporated funds. And this, originally, you may recall that when we divvied up the funds to municipalities, there was a component of that allocation that was allocated to the unincorporated area. And we had directed that those funds be administered and recommended for distribution via the Development Committee through Mr. Martin's direction. And since that time, though, what we've done with our county allocations is covered a number of the expenses that would otherwise have been funded through that committee allocation. And so I've had discussions with Mr. Martin about this, and he's met with Mark Van Kerkhoff and staff on that. And I don't know, Mr. Martin, do you want to address that issue?
Well, continuing your thought, virtually every program that we put together has application to the unincorporated as well as the incorporated area. So both from the standpoint of practicality and creating an unnecessary parallel source of activity, I polled the Development Committee, I think 4 of whom are sitting in this room, this committee, and everybody agreed with the thought that we have commitments to some of those funds for fire protection districts and the other designated governmental bodies. And my thought, and I think the committee's consensus, is that to the degree those monies aren't expended, they come back into the pool for reassignment by this committee. And presumably the reassignment will be on the same countywide basis that we've done otherwise. So I don't want to, I would recommend that we not have another step. I think that when we set up the county portion of it, we had a particular focus in mind, and that focus, I think, has been addressed by the manner in which we've set up the program. So
those funds theoretically could be included in the contingency fund at this point, subject to being redirected after we get through the allocation process.
Yeah, the only lien on those funds right now, to my knowledge, would be the fire protection districts, the townships, the library districts to the degree they're unincorporated, charities and business grants. And we've already got a program for that.
And the dollar amount of that allocation, my recollection was, after we netted things out, was in the $4 million range.
Yeah, I remember the original $7 million attribution, but
okay, it started out, I think, at 7, and then after we did the allocations directly to the district. So in any event, as far as the committee is concerned, what that'll do is provide an additional pool of funds to supplement some of the other issues we raised. I know as we've had our weekly meetings, there's been comments about using the contingency fund for one purpose or another, and the concern was that we would overcommit that. But I think if we have the additional funds from the unincorporated areas, knowing that we've served their needs otherwise through other grants in the program, we can help fill in the other areas.
Well, and if I can add, from a perspective of simplicity, and I think at the fire protection districts, we have a whole myriad of different setups, and our basic goal has always been to make certain that every fire protection district has the ability to apply for the money and receive what it should have under the available funds. That's going to be a lot easier to administer if you don't have a second review body looking at it. So.
All right, well, we'll see how those funds come in, but so your committee, in other words, is not going to take any further active role at this point in trying to designate a use for those funds.
No, and again, another practical consideration, we don't have time to wait for applications to come in and then put together a parallel program and hope that we can get in an advisory opinion that goes to the board and gets acted upon. I just think it makes no sense.
Mr. Fraz?
I think I represent the most rural board here on the committee, and looking at the governmental agencies, the small business, which includes farm, and all the programs we've got. I think you're exactly right. I can't think of anyone else in my district that's going to be looking for assistance. So
Well, and if I can, I just thought of another conclusory remark. The development staff is in the process of figuring out how they can best communicate the availability of these funds to all of the businesses in the unincorporated area. So we're not, as a department, abandoning the project. It's just that in the final shakedown, coming back to this committee makes more sense than having a second review.
And on that note, could I just mention, I know Mr. Hanson talked to Mr. Berger today about a handout, a physical paper handout. And once that's available, the board members could actually walk their downtowns or whatever, their business community, the chambers, and distribute that. And I would ask Roger in the print shop if that comes your way. I mean, we could be handing them out today, so the sooner the better on that. Thank you.
All right, so anyone have any, on the committee, is there anyone or any board member that wants to comment on the plan with respect to the unused or unallocated unincorporated funds? So the plan will be to bring those into our pool of additional funds. All right, one other issue then, we'll move forward with that as a concept. Thank you, Mr. Martin. Is when we had originally set up the municipal program, we didn't know where we were headed long-term with respect to the other allocations that we were going to make. So we had approved upfront a percentage of the distribution of funds to the municipalities, holding back a certain percentage. If we were in that process today, I'm not sure that we would have done that, because I think we're farther along in the program, having a better handle on where things are at. So I think one of the things the committee should consider is modifying our resolution as it relates to this municipal share, that as long as a qualifying application comes in, that the treasurer would be authorized with the state's attorney's approval to disperse 100% of the municipal allocation instead of having to wait for a subsequent percentage after the fact. Does that make sense at this point?
Do you need a motion or?
Yes.
I'll make that motion, then open for discussion.
Okay. Mr. Fraz moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Thomas seconds. Discussion? Mr. Lulvis, that would just simply require a resolution modification or modifying the program to delete the holdback and to provide for 100% disbursement?
Yeah, I believe so. I'll have to check with Mr. Onzek and Finance to make sure that it matches up with his budget, the way that that is set up.
But if we give you parameters for that and an outline today, we could move that on to executive committee for approval.
Yes.
Could you read the motion back before we vote? Well, the motion is, again, it will be, is to direct the state's attorney's office to work with our finance director in preparing a modification to the existing resolution for the municipal program that would eliminate the two-step distribution process, whereby we provided the majority of the distribution up front with a holdback, and essentially eliminating that.
Yes.
Okay.
Agreed.
Any further discussion? Clerk, please call the roll.
Hanson,
Yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Fraz,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Sturgis, Thomas,
Yes.
O'Shea.
Yes. All right, resolution passes. All right, the final item that I had for discussion today was the issue that Mr. Shefflow had raised regarding the census issue. I know this has been an issue we've dealt with since the beginning of the process. We moved forward with a number that the committee was comfortable with and the board was comfortable with, knowing that we would allow municipalities that had concerns to be able to raise the issue and we could consider that down the road. So we are further down the road. We have made the allocations based on a census figure that we felt comfortable with. For purposes of clarification, can I just, and I should know the answer to this question, but I don't. The census figure that we used in the allocations here, was that the same census figure that the state used in deciding how much we received in terms of population? Right, the 2019, Mr. Elvis.
I believe the amended 2019 census figures are the figures that everybody's using. In other words, everybody, meaning the federal government, when they determined what they were going to allocate. I believe the state was consistent with that.
So if
using
we're going to
those
be
numbers.
completely fair, what we should be able to do is go back to the federal government and the state to say, wait a minute, you gave us numbers based on a certain population figure that were different than reality, and therefore we want more money. But we know that's not going to happen. So the question is, do we, within the, what I'll call limited resources that were provided to us, make an exception to a municipality who can establish that their numbers are higher than the census numbers that we saw before? I mean, that's the issue before us. Mr. Frost?
We already had a little bit of that early on where the cities were coming in and saying, hey, we got this new development going in and we estimate it will be this many people. And I mean, where do you stop? You know, so I think we need a black and white, clear cut, measurable, quantifiable place to go. And that seems to be it. And I know the state's attorney McMahon was very adamant about that, and I agree.
Ms. Thomas?
I simply concur. And I raised this issue when it first came up, that if we open the door to one, we'll have to open it to everyone. And I think probably a majority can present a case to increase the numbers. So I think we need to stand firm on the 2019 census numbers.
Anyone else from the committee have a comment on that?
I think that if you're dealing with a finite number, you're squeezing a balloon. And if you squeeze here, it's just going to pop out someplace else. So we found a relative number that was fair to everybody at the time, and I think we stick with it.
You know, one thing we don't know, and I guess we won't know until all the applications in are vetted, are those municipalities that are challenging their census number going to submit applications for more money than they were allocated? Because in order for this to be relevant, they would have to have supporting expenses for more than what we allocated already. Gentlemen from the audience.
Sure, Doug Shefflow.
Hang on, Doug. There's a.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Chairman Hoshay. Dan Showman, representing the city of Elgin. Just respectfully, we have seen a lot of population gain in Elgin and new developments. The census figures from 2019, they're estimated. They're not a factual basis. So we would hope that the committee would consider some other source of funding within the county's allocation. And we appreciate you taking this issue so seriously. And Commissioner Shefflow, thank you for bringing it up again.
All right, Doug.
Yeah, so I was going to say I can't speak for the city of Elgin, and I have not spoken to the city of Elgin. I was copied on their latest email. I think, and I don't know whether they're going to exceed their allocation. The last time I saw something in an email, it was, they were below that allocation. So I don't know the status on that. I do, however, think it's demonstrable that the amount of building that's gone on in Elgin, Yorkville, they had a period of high growth. Lake in the Hills, they had a period of high growth, and Elgin was kind of the last frontier, right, when the housing crisis came. But the building has continued because the lots were out there. They're permitted, they're watered, sewered, and just waiting for home builders to build. So my thoughts on it would be that it would have to be more than, it would have to be somehow incorporate the methodology that the Census Bureau uses. I don't know if it's possible to talk to them, but you know, if we could work, if Elgin could work with the Census Bureau and say, okay, you know, based on that information, our methodology would give you a bigger number. To me, that might be a way of increasing the number. And to be fair to all the other cities and villages, I guess you'd have to open it up. But I don't think there are that many that would have sort of a demonstrable increase of thousands of people. And it would come out of contingency or unused funds, or, you know, I'm not going to take it away from any other municipality. It would have to be available funds that are out there. So
if I'm reading the consensus of the committee correctly, the committee's position is not to make any change now. But I think in fairness, what we should do is keep this as an issue for discussion at such point in time as we talk about allocating additional funds should they be available down the road. And I think we'll know more after the municipal applications come in. The deadline is now. We'll know if the application from the entities, I think, Doug, to your point about the number of cities that were challenging, and initially I think there were 5 or 6, none close to the magnitude of Elgin's challenge, but the others were smaller numbers, you know, maybe a couple thousand, 1,500 or less. So although that would add up to substantial money. So at this point, if I'm reading the committee correctly, the committee's not in a position or recommending that we take action on this now, but we can bring it up as an issue at our next meeting or at the meeting following the meeting at which we'll evaluate the city's applications. Is that okay with the committee?
Yes.
All right. Is there any other business for the committee today? Any other issues we need to address, Mr. Chairman?
I'm not sure that it's an additional piece of business, but I think just clarification. It goes back to, I think, what you addressed at the very beginning. I think that you had mentioned about business interruption losses being an eligible use of funds. If I understand that correctly, what you're probably referencing are 2 specific answers to frequently asked questions, number 24 and 32 from the Treasury Department. And I think that was really good. And I think it's very helpful to small business owners in Kane County. But I'm not sure that it was clear, and it would need to be clear all the way through our professional staff for applications and things like that. If you can put up 24, I just before we leave the meeting today, I think that you made it clear to some people on the committee. I'm not sure that I fully understood it, but could you readdress that? Is that the intention of the body? Yeah, it's this. There's number 24 and 32.
Well, I think that the
did I understand it correctly?
No, my reason for comment was the question was raised that a number of businesses have been negatively impacted, and some of them thought that their losses could have been covered by business interruption and insurance. And the prevailing position of the insurance industry has been that this type of shutdown is not the type of an event that would cause the insurance company to be liable for those expenses. In some arenas, that's being challenged legally at this point. And if the outcome was that, in fact, there was coverage, it could cause a collapse of the insurance industry because all these losses would be covered. And so I guess that's an issue yet to be determined. However, I guess the purpose for my raising the issue was simply to state to the businesses that although you may not be getting coverage for your under your business interruption insurance, this could be a supplement to that to be able to help out businesses who had interruption. Okay. We did, one of the concerns that was raised to me was whether the committee was sensitive to that issue. And I know that I just wanted to reiterate that when we discussed that program, we did specifically mention if businesses were shut down, and we debated whether they had to be shut down completely or partially. But one of the focuses of our program was to make sure that those businesses could get relief through this program. So
Yes.
now you've put up a slide for paragraph 24. If there's a question on 24, I'll be glad to address that.
Good. It's the idea, I think everything you said is accurate, that the insurance companies, and I would be betting on the insurance companies, not because it's the right position, but because my guess is they'll prevail in the courts. I believe that the US Treasury has put themselves in the position of being the insurer of last resort for business interruption, that government closed them down either entirely or in part. And they made it explicit in both answers number 24, which is up on the screen, where it says the amount of a grant to a small business to reimburse the cost of business interruption caused by required closures would also be eligible expenditure under this section of the CARES Act. So if it is the intention, but I think that we probably have to clarify it, if it's the intention of the CAC committee to include that, I believe that they are going to be asking businesses for financial information that establishes that they were hurt in a loss from business interruption. So the justification for the CAC committee would be under this answer, and then also number 32. And these are explicit.
All right. So in answer to your specific question on 24, I would say this. The answer to the question says specifically that governments have the discretion to determine what payments are necessary.
Yes.
And in establishing our program, we did establish the type of expenses that were compensable. We talked about rent, mortgage payments, utilities, things of that nature. Those are all costs that a business not having revenue would have to pay, but for the loss of that revenue. So I think the committee did carry out or did use the discretion granted it under the answer to paragraph 24 in spelling out the program. If there's something more that we need to add to that definition, then I guess I'd like to understand what it is specifically that would be to add to that. But I think the program the criteria we set in establishing the grant and the documentation that we required to establish the need will, number one, prove that there was a business interruption, and number two, will establish that there were expenses that were compensable. So if there's something more to add,
yes, what I'm suggesting is that I've kept the books for small businesses my entire life, and I'm confused by how it would fill out that whether. Now, I understand the individual pieces like rent and those things. I can define those. But I think that clarification from the CAC committee all the way through the staff, so that when business owners apply, they know that something that wasn't specifically said isn't excluded.
I think the elephant in the room that you could be referring to is lost profit,
not profit, revenue.
Well, lost
profit.
revenue part of it. And I think we dealt with that in terms of addressing the expense side, not necessarily the revenue side. So, this could this could be a subject for debate. If you want to get into the PPP loans, there were businesses that qualified for PPP loans that didn't have any revenue loss.
No, I'm not addressing
But it's
PPPs.
the same issue. It's the same concept. And the question is, what are the parameters that we're establishing? Certainly, we're establishing it if your business was interrupted, you can qualify for a grant if you meet the criteria that we've established and have the expenses that we've established.
Here's my fear is that we too narrowly define something and then exclude. We've already excluded at least 3 people I'm aware of, 3 businesses, a design business in Hampshire, a printing broker in Elgin, an auctioneer in Doug Shefflow's area because of the at-home restriction. I understand. I accept the decisions of the CAC committee. However, now there's the question of if we too narrowly define what people are going to be basing their applications on, people could say, we're not going to apply. And I know that the committee is trying to do the most good for the most businesses. And I would say that the way to do that in this final meeting before the webinar on Friday is to make it clear that losses due to business interruption are covered in this one. Specifically, yes, you can at your discretion and under number 32. So I would just say, I think you have a big thing to clarify that other losses, we typically don't think of everything that could occur, but there will be situations by our small businesses that we will not have thought of. And so this becomes an important catch-all that's explicitly clarified in the frequently asked questions and which other counties are doing for their small
Well,
businesses.
all right, let me try to approach this a different way because in fairness, we don't want to roll out a program and change the rules. So whatever the rules are, they should be in place before the program gets rolled out. What specific language change are you suggesting we consider?
I'd be happy to look at the specific, exhibit A, because that's the small business. That's in resolution 2272, I believe. So it'd probably be an insertion of probably 3 or 4 words that would be losses due to business interruption. So it'd be those 4 words in exhibit A.
Would that be excluded, those 3 words? You're excluding that?
No, it would be
You're adding.
inserting them so that you're inclusive.
I guess, if I could speak.
Surprise.
As a member of the committee, it was clear to me the intent of what we're doing here. Our goal is to help businesses survive, not make them whole. I mean, if you're talking about making them whole,
I didn't say that.
Something that would put the insurance businesses the insurance industry out of business. Our 93 million is going to be a pittance. I mean, if a company did $10 million in sales, which isn't exactly a huge company, and they want to be made whole, that's 10%.
No, we
over
haven't.
10% of it.
We have a $20,000 maximum, and for newer businesses, a $10,000. So we're not making anybody whole. We're just saying, is that loss eligible? The federal government has said you can do that if you want to. If you choose not to, I understand that decision. But you have 2 specific pieces of guidance in the federal regulations that allow you to do that. I would suggest that you do that. If you choose not to, that's your decision.
I would just say this, and I understand the comment. I think we were deliberate in establishing the specific criteria for our program to allow staff to have a more black and white scenario instead of creating a gray area for them to be concerned about. And in doing so, I think the existing program did define the expenses that we contemplated would be appropriate for reimbursement. But I just want to say the history of this was not to cheat any business out of being eligible. I'm just looking for an example of something that isn't covered under our existing program that could be covered if we were to make the amendment. And I think what Mr. Franz is saying is, to the issue of making whole, you get more focus then on the revenue side as opposed to the expense side. And we were a more expense side focused program.
I guess on the other end of the scale, with the $20,000 limit to claim business interruption,
everyone would comply.
Well, yeah, and it's going to be a super tiny little business that has $20,000 in business interruption.
Right.
For some restaurants, that's a day's sales.
Ms. Thomas?
I'm not comfortable with broadening the guidelines. I mean, if you look at the FAQs and the guidance from Treasury, I mean, they're giving very specific examples in a lot of cases talking about PPE, modifications to workspaces, support basically for the frontline workers, whether they're health care providers or public safety officers. So I think that what the chairman is proposing, and I understand, I just think it will create like you said, too much of a gray area, and I think we should stay away from that.
Any other comments from the committee? Is there anyone on the committee that wants to propose a change to the small business grant criteria that we've already established? All right, hearing none, I don't want to, again, as this committee is 7 members of a much larger board. And one thing I will, that I think we'll be facing here, even though it seems like a long way away, but it won't be, in about another 30 days, we're going to be in a position then, or maybe shortly before then, to know what our commitments are, what the needs are of the applicants, so that we can see what we do with the rest of the funds. And if anyone in that process, as we go through the process, has an equitable argument that they can make to the board, those additional funds could be suited to a program that would make up that difference. So I don't want to foreclose anyone or seem like we're shutting the door, but we've got to get something done. I think if we created the vague or a more vague category, it would create a much more difficult vetting process in the applications at this point. So, all right, if there's no recommendation from the committee to act on that, is there any other business for the committee today? We have one resolution that we're going to then pass on to executive, subject to being drafted by the state's attorney's office. All right, if there's no further business, Ms. Thomas?
So please remind us, where are we with the expenses for the county? I thought we were going to be looking at additional or new priorities from the departments.
At our last committee meeting, we moved forward, and I believe at the last board meeting, we approved an allocation of those items. After our, it may have been 2 committee meetings ago, maybe there was a week in between, but we agreed that the state's attorney, or that the sheriff and and Roger and and Barb Jeffers would get together to see if there's any reallocation that they wanted to make. And my understanding from that was they worked collaboratively and agreed with what we had done. So didn't we pass resolution? I mean,
But don't we have to still find another, I don't know, I can't recall the amount, still reduce the?
No, we actually allocated slightly more than we had available by about $200,000 plus or minus with the vetting that we did. So at this point, if everything that we approved gets expended, the counties used their entire allocation, but for the unincorporated areas. Is that your understanding, Mr. Onzek? Okay. Mr. Hanson?
It's my understanding too, and I'm not trying to put the gas pedal down on anyone. When should we expect the vetting of these internal requests to be okayed from staff and from the state's attorney? That will have an impact on what we think may be available at the end for possible repurposing.
Mr. Lulvis, do you want to address that, or Fabiola? Question was regarding the internal requests from the county that have been submitted. That's going through a vetting process as we speak.
It is.
And when we expect an answer?
We will meet with finance on Thursday, and we'll be able to give you an answer after our meeting then. So all the invoices that were submitted by the county departments are going under review by KEB right now.
Okay. Can you, would it be possible, I guess I'm going to ask that you do this, to create a spreadsheet that by category of permissible grant applicant in terms of requests made, requests approved, funds dispersed by each category, and then each applicant within the category? So, for example, under the municipal area, we would know which municipalities have applied, how much they're requesting, so that if someone calls us and says, hey, I didn't get, did you get your application in or not, that we would have that.
I have something already in place. I'd be happy to share it with you. And if you think that's.
I think if you could share it with the committee, maybe if you could just, obviously, I'm not trying to hold back information.
No.
But I may have just a suggestion on formatting or
Okay.
adding more information, but I'd like to get out to the entire board as soon as possible, periodic updates, because I think that'll answer a lot of questions that you may be faced with. And so one thing that would be interesting is once the business grants close, we don't have to have a list of the applicants necessarily, but I'd like to know the total amount that's requested.
Oh, yes,
you
we
know,
have, we
to-
are.
To
planning
get those
that.
figures out, because that will then dictate what additional work we need to do. Same with the fire districts. I think the municipal, if you could give us a list of who's applied and how much they've asked for,
Mhm.
at least for starters. If you already have a format, that's fine. Don't hold it back. Just send it out. I just may suggest that we tweak the formatting for future reports. But I think the committee's interested and the board's interested, based on what we've done, to see what the requests are.
Yeah, I had anticipated that, and I was maybe expecting to go through the entire review of the municipalities first before bringing that up. But whatever I have, I'll work on it and send it out.
Okay, the reason to, I mean, for example, that'll help us address the population issue. If we knew what if Elgin's applied and they've applied for, less than what their allocation is, then that population issue could be moot. I don't know that yet. So
Okay.
if we had that information, that would be helpful.
Okay.
Mr. Frost?
I guess I know where Ms. Thomas is coming from. My recollection was we reached somewhat of a conclusion or a roadmap to a balanced budget, if you will. But I did think that sheriff, IT, and health were going to get together and
We did.
make it work. So you did that?
Yes, we
Okay.
did meet the last county board meeting. There was a resolution that approved attachment A, which had the modified list, which
So it
I
hit
believe
county,
Joe
it hit county
Lonzik
board before it came
reviewed
back
and
here.
Right.
and
It came,
finalized.
yeah, so it went directly to county board. If there was going to be a problem, it was going to come back here. And I did receive a call from the sheriff after that meeting indicating that there was nothing more to discuss, that they were in collaboration on that,
Yeah.
right?
So
Okay.
understood.
If we, you know what, if we could just get a clean copy of what that was from last week. I mean, I've got stuff written, I've got notes all over, just a
Duranza, could you send out a
nice,
copy of the
clean copy
resolution?
would be so, yay.
Right. All right. In terms of resolutions, though, there may be one more resolution. Mr. Onzig, is there a finance resolution that you want us to pass on? This is a housekeeping matter.
Yes, I had emailed it out to you last Friday. It's really to fine tune the budget adjustment that had just been passed by the county board last Tuesday. And it's really, an accounting technical issue where instead of the health department charging their expenses to the coronavirus relief fund, they'd be charging it within a sub-department within the public health fund. And so basically it's moving the budget that had been approved by the board for the health department. It's instead of those amounts appearing on line items within the coronavirus relief fund, they're being moved to a transfer line item, and then they're being transferred to the public health fund, and then they're allocated to the same line items within the public health fund. So it's the same exact budget dollars. It's just the mechanism of how they're being dealt with is changed for accounting purposes.
Is there, everyone on the committee received a copy of this? Mr. Frost, do you want to move this on to the,
Yeah, I'll move the motion as provided to us.
okay, is there a second? Mr. Sturgis, discussion? Clerk, please call the roll.
Hanson,
Yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Fraz,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Aye.
Surges, Thomas,
Yes.
O'Shea.
Yes. All right, the motion carries. So we have two resolutions that'll be going on to the executive committee, and one will come from Mr. Onzig and the other from Mr. Lelvis. All right, is there any further business? Next meeting, do we want to have a meeting between now and, I guess, is there any action that the staff would want us to take with respect to matters that are pending between now and the October 8th meeting that Mr. Lulvis referenced. All right. Subject to an issue coming up, in which case I'll send out a notice for a meeting then. Our tentative date for our next meeting will be the 8th with a time to be established after we check the schedule. Mr. Hanson?
And the October the 8th proposed meeting is to review how many different programs worth of permissible.
So in addition to the municipal applications, you will have an opportunity at that meeting to review and allocate or recommend allocations for two other groups. One being the fire protection districts, and the second one being the other units of government, including libraries, parks, townships, and the Forest Preserve District. In advance of that meeting, you'll receive bound packets of the applications that come in. They're due again tomorrow at the end of the day, along with a worksheet for you to fill out. We'll have some instructions for you. And we'll ask the committee members to come up with their own recommendations. We'll average those numbers and return them to you for your meeting on the 8th or 9th as the basis of the beginning of your deliberation at that meeting. This is the process that we followed for some years now. It's worked quite well.
I think the only other issue that's on the horizon here, and there's a lot of work to be done between now and then, is to have this committee begin acting on what we're going to do with contingency funds, with funds being available after the fact. And after this round of applications coming in is completed, we'll know what the requests are, we'll know if there's any additional funds, and then we've got to act to figure out what we're going to do with the rest of those funds.
The last bit of information I'd like to mention is that you may recall at your last meeting, we also suggested you hold the date open for October, I think it's October 26th. And that would be for the purpose of reviewing and allocating or recommending allocations for nonprofit agencies.
Okay. All right. I was hoping you were going to say like December 15th. Just private joke, sorry. All right, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Kenyon. Mr. Frost seconds. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, we are adjourned. Thank you.